everybody. How we doing today? Good. Look up here on the screen. It is that time of year, and if you're brand new here, one of the things that I do is because I'm a Cowboys fan, I make a little bet with Commanders fans, and this is not religious, has nothing to do with Jesus' faith or anything. This is a waste of time, I know, but I just want to go ahead and make my bet, even though I've debated whether I should this year, because I am 150% sure the Cowboys are going to lose today. Thought I'd keep the tradition alive, though, so here we go. If the Commanders lose, then Commanders fans, you got to give a little extra in offering next week, all right? If you're new here, you're like, people don't do that. They do, and I appreciate it. They're writing a memo like, this is because we lost a bet. So that's what's going to happen. If the Cowboys lose, or should I say when the Cowboys lose, in 2 weeks, I will wear a Commanders jersey or T-shirt up here. Yeah, I will do that. So go ahead and get your cameras and phones ready to take photos of that. So anyway, speaking of losing, 2010, there was a guy whose name is Laszlo Hennig, and Laszlo was getting into this new stuff. He was a software engineer, getting into this new stuff called cryptocurrency. And he comes across about 10,000 of these things called Bitcoin. Now, he's trying to figure out, is this stuff real? Is this invisible money that we have on the internet? Is it real? Can we use it? So he gets on a forum and he throws out this idea. He's like, hey, I will pay somebody 10,000 Bitcoin to send me a pizza. Well, somebody responds to that and say, I've got you. So he takes these Bitcoin, he sends it to this guy. Not too long after that, he gets these 2 large Papa John pizzas with the works topping on it, right? He's excited because this cryptocurrency, he can actually use it to buy something tangible. And of course, he gets some tasty pizza to eat. Nobody thinks about this for years. In 2019, 60 Minutes gets wind of what happens, and they come to him and they do an interview with him and say, hey, do you know how much that pizza cost you today in Bitcoin? Because when he bought that pizza, it was about $40 in Bitcoin that he spent in 2010. In 2019, that pizza cost him about $80 million. Or as of yesterday, $990 million. People are like, how could you have made such a dumb decision? How could you have done this? He's like, look, with the information I had at the time, it made sense to me. Now, let me let you know this too. May 22nd is known as Bitcoin Pizza Day because of Laszlo, right? So if you want to celebrate, there you go. Put that on your calendar. Like, we hear a story like this and we're like everybody else, right? We're like, wow, how could you have made such a decision? How could you have done something like this with your Bitcoin? Well, again, the answer is, with what he had at the time, if we had had that same information at the time, we would have probably have made the exact same decision. Like, he didn't realize what he had back in 2010. I wonder, do we realize what we have today? If you live here in the DMV and you work and you get an income, that means that you are in the top 1% wealthiest people in the world. You think we'd be satisfied with that, right? But we're definitely not. Gallup, back in 2010, asked people, what do you need to make to feel satisfied? What's the income you need? The average they came back with was $75,000. If people in 2010 made $75,000 a year, they'd be happy. In 2024, that number is $186,000 a year in salary. Cardrate.com did a survey this year, and they found that 66% of those who make $40,000 said they would be happy if they were making $100,000. And only 39% of people who are making $150,000 said they were satisfied with what they were making as a salary. This is called the hedonic treadmill phenomenon, that no matter your income, you are never satisfied with what you make. In fact, research has continued on. They're like, hey, what do you need to make? Everybody says the same thing. We need to make 20% more. If I make 20% more, then I will be content. I will be happy. I will have everything that I need. That no matter what my income is, if it goes up 20%, I'll be happy. But what do we find over time? That we're still not happy, even if that happens. John McDonald is from cardrate.com. He's the one who put this together. He said, people chase a higher income to achieve happiness, only to return to a baseline level of contentment after a short-lived boost. That means that even if you make 20% more, you're still not happy. Because deep down, we say to ourselves, if I have this amount of money, I want to be whole and I'm going to be complete and I'm going to be happy. I feel like we've almost got this romantic relationship with our money, right? We tell our money, like, you complete me. I need a little bit more of you, but you complete me. Well, let's say we get more. Let's say our income's increased. Let's say we make 20% more. The good news is we're really generous at that point, right? We're like, man, I'm making more. I feel so good about this. I'm full of gratitude. I'm thankful. So I'm going to just give as much of this away as I can because I've been given this. Well, let me give you some generosity statistics. You want to know which income groups give the most percentage-wise when it comes to generosity? The group number one who gives away the most is those that make over $10 million. I'm sure some of you fall into that category here at the Journey, but I don't know anybody who makes that kind of money. That group gives 9.3% of their income away. You want to know who number two is? Those who make under $50,000 a year give 8.4% of their income away. For those between those two incomes, between $50,000 a year and $10 million a year, the average that that group gives away is 3.725. You want to know who gives the least? Those that make an income between $100,000 to $500,000 a year. That group only gives away 2.9%. Now that's talking in general, okay? Thankfully, in the church, we're much better at this. Let me give you some, well, don't amen yet. I appreciate the amen, but not quite yet. How about the church? Only 5 to 10% of church attendees follow traditional tithing practices, which means they give 10% of their income to the church. And of those, 77% actually give more than 10%. Almost half the people in a church contribute less than 10% of all giving. 50% give less than 10%. That means 50% give the other 90%. And in 2022, the average church offering per person per year was $2,848. Like, we hear Laszlo's story and we think, like, how could he not know what he had, right? But maybe the question is, do I realize what I have? And so that's why we've been in this money series called Out of Pocket over these past couple of weeks. We give you a little recap if you haven't been here. Week one, we talked about how we how we view money. We said how money's a tool, right? Money's not good, money's not bad. It's a tool that we use to live our lives. But if we believe in God, then we believe that everything in this world, everything in this universe, and everything in the universe is God's, right? So that means what we make, our money, our possessions, our stuff is God's, and we are called to be good stewards of what God has given us. Week two, we talked about how we use money. Very practical. We talked about budgeting. We talked about saving. We talked about investing. We talked about paying off debt. We talked about finding really rich friends who make over $10 million who can pay our debt off for us, right? But really, we finished with this idea of, with what we have, we should be full of gratitude and thankfulness. And out of that gratitude, we should be generous. Now, next week, it's going to be a little lighter. We're going to start our Christmas series, all right? So just want to throw this out there. Next week, we start our Christmas series. Maybe I didn't put a picture in there. Sorry about that. But it's called Waiting Room. Come back. Be ready for that. But right now, just go ahead and tighten up, okay? Tighten up, people, because we're in full force, and we're going to talk about generosity this morning and what we do with our money. But I'm going to talk about it a little bit differently than you may think. I know we have a lot of analytical, data-driven people. I'm going to use quite a bit of data to talk about generosity today, even some government-backed data to help us understand that the church can be the most powerful force in the world today. In fact, it might be the most powerful force in the world today to do good. And so my point today, my goal today is that we walk out of here ready to work together as a church to do the good that we are called to do by God. Before we get there, I want to take a moment and look at an event in the life of Jesus that I really kind of think sets us up for our conversation today. It comes out of Luke chapter 21, starting with verse 1. While Jesus was in the temple, he watched the rich people dropping their gifts in the collection box. Let me get a little context here. Back in those days, they didn't have paper money. They had coins as money. And so when it was your day to go to the temple and to give your offering, you would take your coins, and there were these bronze receptacles. And so you would drop your coins in these bronze receptacles. Can you just imagine the sound of those coins kind of falling into those receptacles? The funny part, or the interesting part, is that scholars say that people would actually sit around these receptacles to watch and to listen as people were dropping their offerings off in those boxes. They wanted to see who was dropping off the most, who was the wealthy, all that kind of stuff. And they just loved kind of hearing the clanging in those bronze receptacles. It reminds me of growing up. I grew up in North Carolina, just a little bit north of Winston-Salem. Winston-Salem was the big city for us. But most of the things that I did growing up were in this town called King, North Carolina. If you're from there, it's not King, it's Kang, North Carolina. You throw an A in there. But that's where I grew up. I did a lot of things there. But there's this restaurant called Stratford Barbecue. Best barbecue in town. Great stuff. R.I.P. They had to close it down a couple of months ago. Who knows why. But anyway, great stuff. But as a kid, we would go there, and there would be these guys out there. We call them the old timers, all right? The old timers would sit out front. They were in their overalls, every single one of them smoking a cig. And they're just watching and talking about everybody who's walking in and everybody who's leaving and all the cars that are going down Main Street and just the people that are all around. That was like their hobbies during the day. And of course, we get a kick out of watching them do this and hearing them talk. That's kind of the image I've got here, right? You got the temple, you got the bronze receptacles where the offering goes, and there's just these people that are just sitting around and they're just watching and they're listening and they're talking about the people who are showing up and what people are doing and what people are giving. They're talking about the wealthy people who are showing up, right? They're all blinged out. They make a big show out of it. They pull out their coins and they're just dumping it in there. People are like, oh, man, they must be special. They must be really wealthy. They must be somebody important, because just listen to the coins as they're hitting the side of that receptacle, that offering box as it goes in. Now, you and I kind of probably think that's weird, right? Because we don't sit around and watch you and myself as we give here, right? Because most of us probably do it at home online. But this was not weird in that culture. People would sit around and watch this, and including on this particular day, we have Jesus and his disciples there. Can you imagine that, though? Here you are bringing your offering to the temple, and there's an audience that is sitting there and watching you. And so this act that was supposed to be all about worshiping God, like you were giving to worship God, it had become this big show. And the wealthy would show up there to show people who they were and what they had. They had made it this exhibit of their wealth. In the midst of this, something happens. Look at verse 2. Then a poor widow came by and dropped in 2 small coins. People are watching. They see the wealthy that are doing this. And the next thing you know, you've got this widow. She's poor. She shows up. She drops these 2 small coins into this receptacle, probably hardly making a noise. And what does Jesus do? Jesus actually elevates her giving above the clanging that was happening with everybody else. Look at verse 3. I tell you the truth, Jesus said, this poor widow has given more than all the rest of them. For they have given a tiny part of their surplus, but she, poor as she is, has given everything she has. What can we learn from this widow? What can we learn from Jesus' teaching here? Giving is about the spirit of faith, not the sum of your money. We talked about this last week. We talked about how giving is about our faithfulness to God. That God has been faithful to us, and we are called to be faithful back to God. It's not how much we give. It's where our spirit is when we give. And we've talked about this in the last couple of weeks. It's where our heart is, right? Where our heart is, where our treasures are, sometimes that's where our heart is, and we have to break apart from those treasures. We've got to make sure that we are faithful towards God. Like this poor widow, she gave everything, which lets us know where her heart was. But those that were making the greatest scene, what does Jesus say about them? He says they gave a tiny part out of their surplus. This was a show for them. This shows us where their heart actually was. But she gives because of her faith. Giving is about the spirit of your faith, not the sum of your money. So when you and I, when we give, is it because of our faith? Are we like the widow, that we are giving because of this deep faith that we have? We're giving everything that we can because of where our faith is. What's moving inside of you and me? Well, hopefully, the reason that we give is because of the mission that we are on together. I mean, that's the reason that we give into something like the church. Generosity is about this mission that we are on. We have faith that God will use us and God will use our resources to change the world, to make a difference in the world, because of this mission that we are on, to see more and more people meet and know and to follow Jesus. Like, that's the reason that we give. And so last week, as we were talking about this, I said, look, if you're a follower, or if you're not a follower of Jesus, we have no expectation for you to give here at The Journey. If you decide you want to give, then thank you for giving to this mission that we believe we are on together. I also said that if you are a part of The Journey and you're a follower of Jesus, there's no expectation for you to give either. Now, I just want to kind of explain that a little bit. When I say that, I mean, we're not going to call you on the phone and like, hey, you didn't give this year. What's going on? We're not going to send you a registered letter sometime like, hey, you didn't give this year. You need to give before the end of the year. We don't have some big dudes in dark suits we're going to send to your house and like, hey, we want to sit down and have a conversation with you about your giving for this year. That's not going to happen, okay? But I want you to hear me out if you're a follower of Jesus. If you follow Jesus, you believe that Jesus is the hope of the world and that the church is God's vessel used so that more and more people can know and meet and follow Jesus. Right? The church has a mission, and the mission is Jesus. And if we follow Jesus, we help this mission to take place through our generosity. And so what I want to talk about here in a little bit is what that looks like for us. But I want you to understand, this isn't something new. This isn't something that just happened or started 20, 30 years ago in churches. This heart of generosity has been around since the church began. Aristides was a 2nd century historian and philosopher, and he writes this to the Roman emperor at the time. He says, the Christians love one another, and he who has gives to him who has not, without boasting. And when they see a stranger, they take him into their own homes and rejoice over him as a very brother. And if there is among them any that is poor and needy, and if they have no spare food, listen to this, they fast 2 or 3 days in order to supply to the needy their lack of food. They observe the precepts of their Messiah with much care, living justly and soberly as the Lord their God commanded them. Every morning and every hour they give thanks and praise to God for his loving kindnesses towards them. Such, O King, is their manner of life. This is a new people, and there's something divine in the midst of them. Like the widow, these early Christians gave everything. They were grateful for whatever it was that they had, but not only were they grateful for it, they were also generous with it too. They were generous in helping the needy. They were generous in helping the broken. They were generous in helping the under-resourced. They were generous in helping the hungry. They were generous in helping the overlooked. But Chad, come on. That was 2,000 years ago. Things are different, right? Times are different. There's expenses to play, and it's expensive to live here, and there's inflation that's going on, and the government has some really good organizations that can take care of that, or there's some really good nonprofits out there. They will take care of that. By the way, let's just be honest, Chad, the church, it just wants my money. For whatever it is that you may think that the church wants your money for. Now, I know we talk about a topic like this today, and it makes some of our skins kind of cringe. It makes us roll our eyes. Maybe you're put off a little bit by this topic. Maybe it feels like when you go to the store today and the associate like flips around the iPad and you see this, leave a tip. Like you go buy a pair of shoes and they flip it around like, hey, you want to leave a tip for me doing nothing? But, see this all over. Can we agree this has come too much today? Can we say that? Yeah, okay, thank you. I wish I had that so I could leave after a message like, hey, you want to leave it up today? That'd be good. Anyway. But for some of us, that's what this feels like when we talk about money, right? We talk about giving, we talk about generosity. This is the tension that we feel. So let me just offer those insights I talked about a little bit earlier, okay? Let me talk about some data points, some government-backed information here that I think can let us see this through a different lens than the church, okay? 2019, Philanthropy Roundtable Organization, which is a secular nonprofit out of Washington, D.C., did a deep dive on a ton of data from the Pew Research Center. And they were asking this one big question: can we do good without God? And so they only asked two questions. Here's the two questions they asked of their participants. First one is religion the problem or the solution? 51% said religion was a problem. The second question was, do you think all the good in the world can still be done without God? Really asking, do you think that good can be done without religious institutions, without the church? 57% said we don't need the church to do good. So I think if we take that information, we could probably conclude that the majority of people would say we don't need the church to do good in the world today. Well, thankfully, the Philanthropy Roundtable Organization didn't stop there. They decided to go and dive deeper into this Pew research and see what they could find. They want to see, are these people right? Is it true that we don't need the church in the world today to do good? Or do we actually need the church in the world to do good today? And here's what they found. And we're going to hit these pretty quickly here. For those who attend church weekly and pray daily, 45% had done volunteer work in the last 7 days. For those who did not attend church weekly or pray daily, only 27% did any volunteer work. For those active in church, 65% gave to the poor, which was 25% more than the average person. Those with some religious affiliation gave double the national average to charity. Those who attended church weekly gave 4 times the national average to charity. Those who attended church weekly outgave people in generosity to non-religious causes. They went on to publish this. Practicing Christians adopt children at 2.5 times the national rate, including foster care. Nearly 60% of all beds for the homeless come from Christian organizations. Christian organizations provide most of the day-to-day help that resettles refugees and asylum seekers arriving in the United States. Majority of volunteers mentoring prisoners and their families, both while incarcerated and after release, are Christians. And local churches provide 130,000 alcohol recovery programs, 120,000 programs that assist the unemployed, 26,000 programs to help people living with HIV and AIDS, which is one ministry for every 46 people afflicted with the virus. Here's what else they found. Christian philanthropy accounted for 70% of all American charity in 2022, $300 billion in total, and Christians outgave the U.S. government in addressing global poverty. Our culture says and talks about being compassionate, right? About loving other people, caring for others. Culture says that humanity should step in and to make a difference in the lives of others. But culture also says, but churches, no. Nope, not the church. They're exploitive, they're unjust, they're just out to get your money. And maybe there's a small fraction where we see that. But for every headline that talks about a church pastor who's embezzled money, for every time that maybe we've heard about a church that has misused funds, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of high integrity Christians living out the mission of Jesus. There are thousands and thousands of churches all across the United States who are doing good work. They're doing good work and not trying to make a name for themselves. But as Aristides said, there's something divine in the midst of them, right? They're living out the mission of Jesus. They're making the world a better place. They're working to bring hope to all humanity. Let's go back to that study where the majority of people think we don't need God, we don't need the church to do good. There's a guy named Tom Holland, not the Spider-Man Tom Holland. This is academic and author Tom Holland, and who nobody actually knows. And he wrote a book called Dominion, How the Christian Revolution Remade the World. I'm in the midst of reading this right now, and it's about the church's influence on society, modern society, in today's society. By the way, non-Spider-Man Tom Holland is also a non-Christian, okay? He's not a Christian. He writes this in his book. He says, the idea that human beings have rights, that they are born equally, that they are owed sustenance and shelter and refuge from persecution, these were never self-evident truths prior to Christianity. The church does not just do good in the world. The world is good because the church is in it. And I know some in the secular world think, hey, the church is worthless. The church doesn't do anything. We don't need the church. We can do this on our own. But it's hard to go against the data. It's hard to go past or beyond the 2,000 years of history that we have of watching the influence of the church in people's lives. The Christians far and away outgive their time and money when compared to the average person. I know when we talk about generosity and giving, our minds go to certain places, and let me just reiterate this. This is not about a budget. This is not about salaries. This is not about keeping lights on in this place. It's not about a playground. Last week we talked about how giving and generosity is about us being faithful to what God has entrusted to each one of us. And that generosity allows the church to do good in the world. And your generosity allows us to do good here in the world too. So what I want you to do is just sit back for a moment. We've got a video we're going to show you of some of the good that we've been able to do this year at The Journey.
Hi, Journey. We've spent the past few weeks talking about money and what it looks like when our vision and actions around money align with God's long-term plans. And we want to take a moment now to celebrate what God has done through your generosity and to share how giving has made a difference globally, in our community, and in our church this year. Did you know that when you give, your gift has an impact beyond the four walls of our church and even beyond our local community? It's because of your generosity that we are able to support partners all around the world. In Southeast Asia, we support Central India Christian Mission, an organization doing incredible work serving people in need and planting churches. In addition to $12,600 we provided to CICM, through regular support, you gave an additional $5,000 to help one of our churches in India distribute meals during a food distribution event. We have been able to continue to support one of our own, John Michael Becker from the Oak Tree Project in South Korea, who is helping orphans transition into adulthood.
Thank you, Journey Church, for sending me as a missionary to the orphans over 19 years ago, and for all your support through prayers and just generous giving. That's enabled us to help serve over hundreds of orphans through our camps and the scholarship program. We are so encouraged by all of you. God bless you.
We are also a church that is constantly sending people out, and because of your giving, we were able to support one of our formal vocalists, Mackenzie Evans, as she moved to Guatemala to work at an international Christian school. Your giving has also had an impact nationally. As we saw the destruction that Hurricane Helene left this fall in North Carolina and Tennessee, your generosity enabled us to send $10,100 to local churches on the front lines of disaster relief. And here in Northern Virginia, we've continued our long-term support of Koinonia through regular financial support of $9,000, as well as giving away 100 backpacks full of school supplies for local kids at the beginning of the school year and 100 food baskets for Thanksgiving meals for families in need. This year, we have been able to continue building our work with the Springfield Resource Center, and we were able to provide food and a setup for their back-to-school backpack giveaway in August, as well as send 70 baskets to them for their Thanksgiving food basket distribution. And here at The Journey, we were blown away by how you responded to our playground campaign that enabled us to build a new accessible playground. Because of you, we have raised $173,298 so far. Your generosity took a vision of a fun, safe space for every family and turned it into reality. Earlier this year, $10,000 of our Easter offering paid for the 20,000 meals we packed for local families at our Generosity Feeds event in April. In addition to Generosity Feeds, $15,122 of our Easter offering went to covering counseling sessions through Safe Harbor for anyone in our church who needs counseling. And finally, your gifts, along with nothing less than God moving in this church, supported our growth to 3 services this spring and 31 baptisms so far. Everything we do at The Journey is for the purpose of helping people take their next steps towards Jesus. So thank you for your financial support that enables us to make this happen.
The cool part is, did you know you're going to see your son? No, there you go. All right. Your granddaughter too, right? There you go. All right. Didn't mean to surprise you with that, but glad you guys got to see that today. This is John Michael's parents right here. So the cool part is today we have 2 more baptisms that are happening that will put us at 33 baptisms for the year. It'll be the most baptisms we've ever had here at the Journey in any single year. We still have more to come. So it's kind of cool to think about what God is doing here in this place. Hear me out. The church doesn't exist to give people like me a job, okay? It doesn't exist so that we can live our own little tiny missions within the church. It doesn't exist to give us something to do on a Sunday morning. It doesn't exist so that we can have a tax break when we give every single year. The church exists to reach those who are far from Jesus. It exists to heal those that are broken. It exists to help those who are poor. It exists to protect those who are overlooked. It exists to connect us when we are lonely. It exists to help us to grow up to be more and more and more like Jesus. I love the way Leslie Newbigin put it. He's a British theologian and missionary. He said, "We must live in the kingdom of God in such a way that it provokes questions for which the gospel is the answer." If you want to know who we want to be, we desire to be a church that when our community looks at us, no matter who they may be, people that are connected to God and follow Jesus, or people that are far from God and do not know who Jesus is, they look at us and say, wait, there's something different about the people there. There's something different about who they are and what they do. And through that, we get to say, well, I can tell you where that comes from. That comes from who we are in Jesus. That comes from the gospel story of who Jesus is. And so our desire is to be that kind of church. And that happens through our generosity. So what would happen if we were more faithful with what we do have? Begs the question, right? Do we love our money more than we love God? Are we more faithful to our money, or are we more faithful to Jesus? Are we like the wealthy? We're just given a tiny portion of our surplus. Are we more like this widow who gave from her heart and her faith and gave everything that she had? And so last week we put a challenge out there and invited you to jump in and to jump into our 23-week generosity challenge. If you go to our app there, you can find it on that first page there. I just want to kind of invite you to jump into that. If you weren't here last week, or you forgot about it, or you just wanted to try to forget about it the best you could. And by the way, we want anybody and everybody, if you're already given in some capacity, we love to know. And again, we're not sending some big dudes in dark suits to have a conversation with you if you don't fulfill this. We just want to challenge us to be in this together. And so let me share those 3 challenges. You fit into probably one of these. The first one is for some to give 10% of your income over the next 23 weeks, right? We talked about a tithe last week. We talked about what that looks like. So for some to jump in like, hey, this is what I'm going to do. I'm given X amount, but I'd like to jump in and do a little bit more than that and try to make this a goal for these next 23 weeks. What does 23 weeks have to do with anything? Easter's coming up in a little bit less than 23 weeks now. And so that's kind of our goal. We're shooting for Easter here, all right, for this challenge. Second group, to give a percentage of your income. Maybe you're struggling financially now, but you want to give, and you're trying to figure that out. Maybe you're like, hey, I'm just going to do 1% or 2%, but you're giving a percentage of your income over these next 23 weeks. And then the last group, you're here, you don't give, and we're inviting you to jump in and say, hey, for the next 23 weeks, I'm going to give $23 a week for those 23 weeks. Again, if my math is correct, that's $529 over the course of those 23 weeks. But you're saying, hey, I'm going to do something because I feel something, the Spirit's leading me to do this, and I want to jump in this way. So again, you can go to their app, let us know you want to jump into this. The only thing we might do is send an email out like, thanks for jumping in, appreciate it, but we're not going to hound you in any way, shape, or form. I do want to add, like I said last week, this isn't because we're trying to make budget, okay? It's not because we're in a financial crisis that we're doing this series. Giving is about maximizing what God has entrusted to us, so together we can do good in this broken world we live in. But why are we called to be faithful through our generosity? Well, it's because God has been faithful to us through Christ. It's a passage you're probably familiar with, John 3:16 and 17. For this is how God loved the world. He gave his one and only Son, so that everyone who believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. God sent his Son into the world not to judge the world, but to save the world through him. You know who God has a heart for? God has a heart for the broken. God has a heart for the overlooked. God has a heart for the poor. God has a heart for the oppressed. God has a heart for sinners. God has a heart for you and for me. And God has had that heart for humanity since the beginning of time. It's why God sent Jesus to this earth to remind us that God has a heart for all humanity. And so God has shown his faithfulness to us through the sending of his Son, Jesus. And we show our faithfulness to God through how we live our life. We show our faithfulness to God in how we follow Jesus. We show our faithfulness to God in how we serve others. We show our faithfulness to God by being who God has created us to be. And part of that faithfulness is in how we give and our generosity back to God. If we go back to Laszlo and his $990 million pizzas, again, looking back, people said, how could you have done that? And his response, again, with the information I had at the time, that made sense to me. Here we are at the end of this series, and we've talked about money for 3 weeks, and we're done after today. But this morning I shared with you data about the work the Big C church, like the church in general, is doing that is good in the world. And we shared with you the good that this church here, the Journey, is doing in the world. And it leaves me with a question. With the information that you have at this time, what makes sense to you? What makes sense to you? Like, I believe the church is the vessel that God has instituted to share the hope of the world because of Christ to the world that we live in, which allows us to do good in this church. It allows us to do good in this community. It allows us to do good in this world. But the beauty of all this is the influence and impact it's going to have on eternity to come. With the information that you have at this time, what makes sense to you?